5 aggregates. The 5 constituents of life. Introduction. From this perspective of Buddhadhamma, all things exist according to their own nature. They do not exist as separate, fixed entities, and in the case of living creatures, they are not distinct and immutable beings or persons, which one could validly take to be a legitimate owner of things, or which are able to govern things according to their wishes. Everything that exists in the world exists as a collection of convergent parts. There exists no inherent self or substantial essence within things. When one separates the constituent parts from each other, no self or core remains. A frequent scriptural analogy for this is of a vehicle. When one assembles the various parts according to one's chosen design, one assigns the conventional term wagon to the end product. Yet if one disassembles the parts, no essence of a wagon can be found. All that remains are the various parts, each of which is given its own specific name. This in fact implies that the self or entity of a vehicle does not exist separate from its constituent parts. The term car, for instance, is simply a conventional designation. Moreover, all of those constituent parts may also be separated into further parts, none of which possesses a stable fixed essence. So when one states that something exists, one needs to understand it in this context, that it exists as a collection of inconstant constituent elements. Having made this claim, the Buddhist teachings go on to describe the primary elements or constituents that make up the world. And because the Buddhist teachings pertain directly to human life, and in particular to the mind, this elucidation of the constituent parts encompasses both mind and matter, both mentality, nama dhamma, and corporeality, rupa dhamma. Here special emphasis is given to the analysis of the mind. There are many ways to present this division into separate constituents of life, depending on the object of the specific analysis. This chapter presents the division into the 5 aggregates, panchakanda, which is the preferred analysis in the suttas. In Buddhadhamma, the human living entity, which is referred to as a person or living being, is divided into 5 groups or categories. 1. Rupa, corporeality, body, material form, all material constituents, the body and all physical behavior, matter and physical energy, along with the properties and course of such energy. 2. Vedana, feeling, sensation, the feelings of pleasure, pain and neutral feelings arising from contact by way of the 5 senses and by way of the mind. 3. Sanya, perception, The ability to recognize and to designate the perception and discernment of various signs, characteristics and distinguishing features, enabling one to remember a specific object of attention at Ramana. For Sankara, mental formations, volitional activities, those mental constituents or properties with intention as leader, which shape the mind as wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral, and which shape a person's thoughts and reflections, as well as verbal and physical behavior. They are the source of karma, intentional action. Examples of such mental formations include faith, sada, mindfulness, sati, moral shame, hiri, fear of wrongdoing, otapa, loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, appreciative joy, mudita, equanimity, upekkha, wisdom, panya, delusion, moha, greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, conceit, mana, views, ditthi, jealousy, isa, and stinginess, macharya. They are the agents or fashioners of the mind, of thought, and of intentional action. 5. Vijnana, consciousness. Conscious awareness of objects by way of the 5 senses, i.e. seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling tangible objects, and awareness of mind objects. There are several points to bear in mind in reference to the final 4 aggregates comprising the mental aggregates, namakanda. Perception, sanya, is a form of knowledge. It refers to the perception of discernment of an object's attributes and properties, including its shape, appearance, colour, etc., as well as its name and conventional designations. For example, one knows that an object is green, white, black, red, loud, faint, bass, bass, high-pitched, fat, thin, a table, a pen, a pig, a dog, a fish, a cat, a person, him, her, me, you, etc. Perception relies on the encounter or comparison between previous experience or knowledge and new experience or knowledge. If one's current experience corresponds with previous experience, say one meets someone familiar or hears a familiar sound, one has recognition. Note that this is not the same as memory. For example, Mr. Jones knows Mr. Smith. A month later they meet and Mr. Jones recognizes Mr. Smith. If a new experience does not correspond with previous experiences, people tend to compare it with 2 previous experiences or knowledge, looking at those aspects that are either similar or different. They then identify the object according to their labels or designations, determined by the similarities and differences. This is the process of perception or designation and identification. There are many layers to perception, including perception in accord with common agreement and understanding. Example: green, white, yellow, and red. Perception in accord with social conventions and traditions. Example: this is polite, this is beautiful, this is normal, this is abnormal. Perception according to personal preferences and conceptions. Example, this is attractive, this is admirable, and this is irritating. Perception based on multiple factors. Perception of symbolism. Example, green and red represents this university, and 2 rings of the bell designate mealtime. And perception according to spiritual learning. Example, perception of impermanence and perception of insubstantiality. There is both common everyday perception and subtle refined perception, i.e. perception that is intricately connected to the other aggregates. There is perception of matter and perception of the mind. Various terms used for sanya, such as recognition, remembering, designation, assignation, attribution, and ideation, all describe aspects of this aggregate of perception. Simply speaking, perception is the process of collecting, compiling, and storing data and information, which is the raw material for thought. Perception is very helpful to people, but at the same time it can be detrimental. This is because people tend to attach their perceptions, which end up acting as an obstruction, obscuring and eclipsing reality, and preventing one from penetrating a deeper underlying truth. In this analysis, perception, sanya, is divided into 2 kinds: ordinary perceptions, which discern the attributes of sense objects as they naturally arise, and secondary or overlapping perceptions. The latter are sometimes referred to by specific terms, in particular as proliferative perception, papanchasanya, perception resulting from intricate and fanciful mental proliferation driven by the force of craving, tanha, conceit, mana, and views, ditthi, which are at the vanguard of negative mental formations, negative sankara. This division highlights the active role of perception and shows the relationship between perception and other aggregates within mental processes. Consciousness, vijnana, is traditionally defined as awareness of sense objects. It refers to a prevailing or constant form of knowing. It is both the basis and the channel for the other mental aggregates, and it functions in association with them. It is both a primary and an accompanying form of knowledge. It is primary in the sense that it is an initial form of knowledge. When one sees something, i.e. visual consciousness arises, one may feel pleasure or distress, feeling of Vedana. One then identifies the object, perception, sanya, followed by various intentions and thoughts. Volitional formations, sankara, for example. One sees the sky, vijnana, and feels delighted, vedana. One knows the sky to be bright, beautiful, the colour of indigo, an afternoon sky, sanya. One is delighted by the sky and wishes to admire it for a long, uninterrupted period of time. One resents the fact that one's view is obstructed, and one wonders how one can find a place to watch the sky at one's leisure, sankara. Consciousness is an accompanying form of knowledge in that one knows in conjunction with the other aggregates. When one feels happy, vedana, one knows that one is happy, vijnana. Note that the feeling of happiness is not the same as knowing that one is happy. When one suffers Vedana, one knows that one is suffering Vijnana. Perceiving something as pleasurable or painful, Sanya, one knows accordingly. And when one engages in various thoughts and intentions, Sankara, there is a continual concomitant awareness of this activity. This prevailing stream of awareness, which is in a continual process of arising and ceasing, and which accompanies the other mental aggregates, is part of every aspect of mental activity, is called consciousness, vijnana. Another special characteristic of consciousness is that it is an awareness of particulars. Knowledge of specific aspects, or a form of discriminative knowledge. This may be understood by way of examples when one sees, say, a striped piece of cloth, although one may not initially identify it as such. One discerns specific attributes, for example, its colour, which are distinct from one another. Once consciousness discerns these distinctions, perception, sanya, identifies them, say as green, white, or red. When one eats a particular kind of fruit, although one may not yet have identified the flavour as sweet or sour, one already has an awareness of such distinctions. Similarly, although one may have not yet distinguished between these specific kinds of sourness, of say pineapples, lemons, tamarind, or plums, or between the specific kinds of sweetness, say mangoes, bananas, or apples, by tasting the flavour, one is aware of its distinctive nature. This basic form of knowing is consciousness, vijnana. Once this awareness arises, the other mental aggregates begin to operate. For example, one experiences the flavour as delicious or unsavoury, vedana, or one identifies the flavour as one particular kind of sweetness or sourness, sanya. The knowledge of specific aspects referred to above may be explained thus. When consciousness arises, for example, when one sees a visual object, in fact, one is seeing only specific attributes or facets of that object in question. In other words, one sees only those aspects or angles that one gives importance to, depending on the mental formations, Sankara, which condition the arising of consciousness, vijnana. For example, in a wide expanse of countryside grows one sole mango tree. It is a large tree, yet it bears only a few pieces of fruit, and in this season is almost barren of leaves, providing very little shade. On different occasions, 5 separate people visit this tree. One man is fleeing from a dangerous animal, one man is starving, one man is hot and looking for shade, one man is searching for fruit to sell at the market, and the last man is looking for a spot to tie up his cattle, so that he may visit a nearby village. All 5 men see the same tree, but each one sees it in different ways. For each one, eye consciousness arises, but this consciousness varies depending on their aims and intentions in regard to this tree. Similarly, their perceptions of the tree will also differ according to the aspect of the tree that they look at. Even their feelings, vedana, will differ. The man fleeing from danger will rejoice because he sees a means to escape. The starving man will be delighted because the 3 to 4 mangoes will save him from starvation. The man suffering from heat may be disappointed because the tree does not provide as much shade as it normally would. The man looking for fruit may be upset because of the paucity of fruit, and the man driving his cattle may be relieved to find a temporary shelter for them. Feeling, Vedana, refers to the sensing of sense impressions or experiencing their flavor. It refers to the feeling or sensation arising every time there is contact and cognition of sense objects. These feelings may be pleasurable and agreeable, painful and oppressive, or neutral. To avoid confusion with the aggregate of mental formations, Sankara, it is important to note that feeling Vedana is an activity at the level of reception. It pertains exclusively to the immediate effect an object has on the mind. It does not pertain to the stage of intention or of acting in response to sense impressions, which is the function of mental formations, Sankara. For this reason, such terms as like, dislike, delight, and aversion usually refer to the activity of mental formations, which involves a subsequent level of activity. These terms normally refer to volitional activities or to reactions to sense impressions, as illustrated in the following mental processes. Seeing an attractive visual form leads to pleasure, leads to delight in that object. Hearing an annoying noise leads to displeasure, leads to aversion. Feeling Vedana plays a pivotal role in the lives of sentient creatures because it is both desired and sought after in the case of pleasure, and feared and avoided in the case of pain each time there is contact and cognition of a sense object. Feeling acts as the juncture directing or motivating the other mental factors. For example, if one contacts a pleasurable sense object, one pays special attention to it and perceives it in ways that reciprocate or make the most out of that sensation. One then thinks up strategies for repeating or extending one's experience of this object. Mental formations, Sankara, refer to both the factors determining the quality of the mind, the fashioners of the mind with intention, Cetana, as chief, and the actual volitional process in which these factors are selected and combined in order to shape and mould one's thoughts, words and deeds, resulting in physical, verbal and mental karma. In any case, the traditional analysis of the five aggregates focuses on the components of reality rather than focusing on the various dynamics in nature that affect human life. For this reason, the description of mental formations, Sankara, in this context normally only mentions a list of these determining factors, the fashioners of the mind, along with their attributes. As for an explanation of conditioned processes, at which stage these factors reveal themselves and are set in motion, this is reserved for the analysis of dependent origination, paticca samuppada, which demonstrates precisely how these factors affect people's lives. In the teaching of dependent origination, mental formations, Sankara, are defined in the context of practical application or operative function. They are divided into Kaya Sankara, physical intentional activity, bodily volition, Vachi Sankara, verbal intentional activity, verbal volition, and Chitta Sankara, mental intentional activity, mental volition. This differs from the analysis of mental formations in the exposition of the five aggregates, in which various determining factors are simply presented as a list. Example: faith, sada, mindfulness, sati, loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, wisdom, panya, greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, intention, cetana, and concentration, samadhi. If one compares these analysis to a motor show, the analysis of the 5 aggregates is similar to laying out all of a car's parts for people to see, while the analysis of dependent origination is like demonstrating the car as it is being driven on the road. Of all the determining factors of the mind, intention, cetana, is leader or chief. No matter how many mental formations are operative at one time, intention always participates as the key factor in the process. For this reason, the term cetana is sometimes used alone to represent all of the mental formations, Sankara. Sankara in this context can thus be defined as intention, cetana, along with as associated factors, Buddhadhamma, connected factors, which shapes the mind as good, bad, or neutral, and which determines thoughts, speech, and physical actions, giving rise to mental, verbal, and physical karma. Besides occasionally representing or defining all mental formations, Sankara, the term cetana, is also used to define or represent the term karma. In this sense, these 3 terms, Sankara, cetana, and karma, all have roughly the same meaning. To offer an analogy, Venerable Mani, the abbot of Majjhima monastery, goes to receive an offering of Tipitaka books. At the formal gathering, an announcement of the honoured guest may state Venerable Mani, or the abbot of Majjhima monastery, or simply Majjhima monastery. All 3 terms express the desired meaning. Besides its central role, intention, cetana, also reveals the special and distinctive properties of mental formations, Sankara, which set this aggregate apart from the others. Cetana may be translated as intention, volition, purpose, or deliberation. The special attribute differentiating mental formations, Sankara, from the other mental aggregates is that they can originate spontaneously. The other mental aggregates of feeling, perception, and consciousness, on the other hand, operate or function with sense impressions that are immediately manifesting in the mind. They are associated with and intend to these sense impressions, and they rely on the reception of them in order to function. Mental formations, however, both deliberate over sense impressions and act in response to them. These explanations may clarify the following questions. Why are feelings of ease and dis-ease classified as sensations, Vedana, while the subsequent factors of liking and disliking are classified as mental formations, Sankara? Why are perception, sanya, recollection, and mindfulness, sati, memory, classified into separate aggregates? Sati is included among the mental formations, Sankara. Why is wisdom, panya, which, similar to perception, sanya, and consciousness, vijnana, is a form of knowledge, classified as a mental formation, Sankara?